Watch this.
A run on hospital resources. Sometimes it's more than a supply and demand issue. It's a supply chain problem. But the amount of liquid oxygen being used by hospitals these days is putting a burden on their systems, a problem now affecting Canyon County. We know former state representative Aaron Von Ellinger will soon be back in Idaho to face felony rape charges. We just don't know when. But does his arrest bring any relief to his accuser? We asked her attorney. And we're making the quick trip to Gem County. Going to learn about the history of this backcountry road with its sharp curves that either make you, squeal with excitement or scream in terror. Staffing isn't the only resource stretched thin at our area hospitals. COVID-19 is a respiratory disease, which we know, which starts by attacking the lungs. So a person infected with the coronavirus, the main reason they would go to the hospital is because they can't breathe. There, they are hoping to find some relief and some air. Sadly, that sometimes means pumping oxygen into their lungs mechanically. But that oxygen, O2, which is all around us, is right now in high demand because of how many patients require it, as we heard last week from Dr. DeShock at Minidoka Memorial.
The last 2 weeks, we've gone through like the same amount of oxygen that we would use in 6 months on a regular basis. I mean, it's just crazy. Like everything that we have is a resource and it's limited, and eventually it's going to run out.
Well, to be clear, oxygen in liquid form like hospitals use is not running out. There isn't a shortage. Norco Medical supplies oxygen to customers in hospitals across 7 states. And we've spoken with them a couple of weeks ago about this oxygen supply thing and how much of it is being used right now. So much so, last month, they helped install a larger oxygen tank at Kootenai Health, the big hospital in Coeur d'Alene. Well, they're about to do similar upgrades at St. Luke's in Nampa. They're preparing to install a new improved system that would deliver the amount of oxygen needed at that hospital at this moment because of the increase in COVID-positive patients. They're also going to be installing a larger backup tank and a larger vaporizer. The vaporizer has kind of been a problem. That's the component that warms the liquid oxygen into a gas so it can be used. The vaporizer, it's had to work double overtime lately. And this has been a concern at several hospitals across Idaho, from the big ones to the smaller ones, because when there's no room at the bigger hospitals, the rural ones then have to stress their oxygen system to keep up with demand there, as you just heard. So it all trickles down, and it's meant delivery has also trickled a bit. To reiterate, the issue isn't in the supply of oxygen. It's getting that supply to a place where they are using more than they ever have.
The challenge is keeping up with the demand of each of the tanks out there. And when you add up the main tank and a backup tank at, over 60 hospitals, you now have 100 tanks that are moving. So every vent that gets turned on, every bed that gets added, we watch those tanks deplete faster than what we're forecasting. So we're simply asking hospitals to conserve and be mindful of what they're using.
Where you used to refill these tanks when they got down to about 30%, now they're being drained even more before you guys can get to them?
Yeah, they're moving so fast, and our trucks are having to go to so many places. The risk is obviously is making sure that we get to that tank before it gets onto the reserve. So have been cases where, unfortunately, there may have only been 18 hours of product left in the tank, or the tank may have gone down to 10 or 20% of its capacity.
Well, if it isn't a supply issue, that sounds, you can see how some people might say there's a shortage, that we can't just have unlimited oxygen setting. Well, how do you explain that?
Yeah, I think there's a national shortage of drivers, and there's probably a shortage of these types of trucks that you need to deliver liquid oxygen that's beyond negative 200 degrees Fahrenheit. It's a very specialized fleet. So it is a distribution challenge, and it's typically built around forecasting methods. You forecast when you need to be at a tank days in advance. Well, if a hospital increases their flow rates by 40% through the evening and for 6 hours of the day, you may find yourself in a situation where there's just too many deliveries that need to be made in the same day.
It's one thing to go from the main tank to the backup tank, but having it run all the time, that's got to lead to some other problems.
Yeah, so there is a vaporizer at each of these systems. That's how the liquid is converted to a gas. That gas is then regulated to a steady pressure going into the hospital. And within the hospital, there's a network of piping. So if the flow rate or the demand on that pipe is too high, the vaporizer may be pushed to a flow rate capacity that it's not capable of. At that point, the vaporizer may ice up. And if it ices up, it means that liquid is not turning into a gas, and the hospital may experience a pressure loss. And there's really no scare here. There's plenty of alarms to indicate that that's happening. And in some cases, we're finding ourselves having to sprint and make emergency upgrades to provide hospitals with equipment to handle higher flows.
Okay, because basically so much oxygen is flowing through the lines are freezing up.
Yeah, and we need equipment to make sure that gas is provided at the quality that it needs to be.
Is this something we should be concerned about?
No, I think we should all just generally be concerned that the pandemic and the surge in the Treasure Valley is lasting as long as it is. Norco is doing what we need to do, just like the hospitals are doing what they need to do. And supply is, I'd say, strong, but everything does have a limit.
Now, the conservation that Elias was talking about, it's not saying that hospitals shouldn't use the oxygen when they need it, but it's kind of like, having the water running while you're brushing your teeth. Just turn it off when you're not using it. And this isn't a panic moment, Elias told us, just an explanation of another layer of issues that hospitals and their suppliers like Norco are dealing with during a COVID surge like this one. We're told they haven't had to limit or allocate deliveries with their other industries yet, but that possibility is on the table. It has meant Norco has had to work quickly, though. Elias told us a project like what they're doing in Nampa starting today would normally take 4 to 6 weeks to plan and to complete. They're doing this one with just 4 days notice. Here's a few other numbers to illustrate this situation. St. Luke's downtown, big building, right? Lots of COVID patients. Elias told us they have an 11,000 gallon oxygen tank, 11,000 gallons of liquid oxygen there on the premises. It used to last them weeks. Norco is now delivering oxygen to St. Luke's downtown every 3 days. All right, here's some other big numbers for you. Idaho hospitals, they've been under crisis standards of care for nearly 3 weeks, all because of the overwhelming influx of those COVID patients during this surge and the overtime, the work required of doctors and nurses to keep up. About a week into this crisis conditions, we heard from Dr. Jim Souza, the chief physician executive at St. Luke's, about how we hadn't come close to reaching a peak in terms of COVID cases and hospitalizations. And he told us how that would translate across the population.
You guys, even if the numbers stay flat on the rate of rise that we're seeing in the state, 9,000 of our fellow Idahoans are going to acquire the infection this week. Out of those 9,000 people, with those generous assumptions, we might actually expect that 3,000 of them are vaccinated. We would predict out of those 3,000 people that 15 of them will need one of our hospital beds, and 3 of them would need an ICU bed. And sadly, 1 of them might die. In the 6,000 unvaccinated patients, we can expect 300 of those people to need our help in a hospital. And we can expect 60 of them to need our help in an intensive care unit. And sadly, we can expect 24 of them to die.
That was back on September 16th when Dr. Souza told us that 12 days ago. Since then, we've seen the numbers reach levels they haven't reached ever. Over the weekend, we got this text message. How about a follow-up on the good doctor's predictions about the numbers for a week in advance? Good idea from an anonymous viewer. So how close was Dr. Souza to his prediction? Unfortunately, very close on one and not close at all on another. We looked at the next 7 calendar days from that day. That would be Thursday, September 16th through Wednesday, September 22nd. Dr. Souza, pretty spot on when he came to cases. We were just shy of his prediction with about 8,434 cases of COVID across the state. But in his model, he believed of those 9,000, we would see 25 deaths from the coronavirus, 24 unvaccinated, 1 maybe vaccinated. Well, during those 7 days, Idaho reported 127 COVID-related deaths, way off the mark by a lot. We don't know the breakdown of how many of those were vaccinated or unvaccinated, but based on information and what we've heard from healthcare workers, it'd be a vast majority that were unvaccinated. And what we can tell you, since May 15th, the day that everyone in Idaho over the age of 12 became eligible to get the vaccine, there's been 719 COVID deaths reported across the state. And according to the state's website, 72 of those were vaccinated, or about 10%. 90% of them, or 647, were unvaccinated. 2 weeks after a warrant was issued for his arrest, a former Idaho lawmaker is in jail in Georgia, waiting to be brought back to Idaho to face rape charges. A series of events being watched closely by his accuser's attorney. All right, we want to hear from you, whether you're new to the 208 or you've been with us since the beginning. Tell us what you want to see more of, or, you can ask us anything. Just text us directly at this number, 208-321-5614. Just be sure to include your name and the hashtag #the208. And stick around. We're going to share as many of the messages we can at the end of the show. It has been 6 months since a 19-year-old former State House staffer accused former Idaho Representative Aaron Von Ellinger of sexually assaulting her. 2 weeks ago, Boise police issued an arrest warrant for Von Ellinger on rape charges. Then on Saturday, 2 weeks after that warrant was issued, he was taken into custody in Clayton County. That's Clayton County, Georgia. He was arrested after flying back to the United States from Honduras. Katya Stepovic spoke with Jane Doe's attorney to see how his arrest has helped bring any sort of relief to her. But they're still processing it because they didn't even know about it until Monday morning when they saw our story.
On Saturday, former state representative Aaron Von Ellinger was arrested as he departed a plane from Honduras in Clayton County, Georgia, charged with rape. The victim, Jane Doe, a 19-year-old former State House intern. Annie Hightower, Jane Doe's attorney, says neither she nor her client were told an arrest had been made.
Both of us were a bit in shock that we had not been notified, and I think we're still sitting with that.
Hightower says both she and Jane Doe were made aware of the warrant issued for Von Ellinger's arrest back on September 9th. But she says the Boise Police Department and the prosecutor's office failed to notify them that they arrested Von Ellinger over the weekend.
We have had contact with law enforcement and the prosecutor's office fairly regularly, and she has been assigned a victim witness coordinator that had maintained contact with her. And so we were surprised that this is the way we found out. It was our understanding that she would be notified at the time of arrest.
Hightower says she learned of the arrest on Facebook from a post of the KTVB News article.
Why do you think that was? Why do you think they didn't tell you right away?
If I had to hazard a guess, I would say just because of where it happened, and there's probably some back-end processes that I'm not aware of. It certainly would have helped. However, had my client gotten notice of this, I mean, on her end, she has been through now several systems which have not treated her well. And this is starting to feel for her like a massive failure in another system that she's in.
Jane Doe was forced to testify in front of the ethics committee back in April. During that hearing, Von Ellinger admitted to the sexual encounter but said it was consensual. He resigned before the legislature voted whether or not to expel him. Right now, Von Ellinger remains held in Clayton County Jail without bond, charged as a fugitive from justice.
It sounds like it's a mixed mixed emotions and mixed feelings with frustration, but also a little bit of relief that he has been arrested.
She is, again, scared, I think, because he has got a lot of supporters that have done her harm in the past. So she's scared for what will happen next. She is relieved that the arrest has been effectuated. I think she is probably feeling some hope for things moving forward and for the opportunity for accountability and closure, and probably just some, wondering what's going to happen next.
According to the Boise Police Department, BPD was not at the arrest in Georgia, and while detectives had information that Von Ellinger was no longer in Boise, it's not clear whether police knew he left Idaho.
We'd like to see him return to Idaho, and the case continued against him. We would like to see him be held accountable for what he did to my client. And hopefully that process moves fairly swiftly, because my client has been involved in lots of processes for a long time now, and she needs time for healing and closure.
I reached out to the Ada County Prosecutor's Office, Boise Police Department, and Von Ellinger's attorney for comment, and I have not heard back. And I also reached out to the Ada County Courthouse to get more information as to when Von Ellinger will be extradited back into Idaho. No word on that yet either. And Brian, if he is convicted, he could face up to life in prison and also will need to register as a sex offender. Well,
I understand the police aren't obligated to keep them in the loop when it comes to how this process plays out, at least up to this point. It just seems like they wouldn't keep them so far out. All right.
Yeah, and they had pretty good communication up to this point, so it was really shocking both for her and her client to find out through our Facebook post.
Absolutely. All right, thanks, Katya. You know, if you type Boise to Emmett in your Google map machine, you'll find out it's about a 45-minute drive. You hit the directions button, and it's a pretty simple explanation. State Street, Highway 44 to Highway 16. Not a bad drive if you haven't made it. It's a straight shot on two pretty straight roads with a sharp right turn in the middle. That's the way it is now. A little more than a century ago, though, you had to take a lot more turns to get into Emmett, and you could still go that way. There's a turnoff called Old Freeze-Out Road just before you hit the current Freeze-Out Hill. Not exactly the coldest spot in Idaho, but there's a reason for the name and why it's no longer the only way into town. It's a relatively short road with 26 curves.
It's a fun hill to weave and wind down.
But don't let the term hill fool you.
A little intimidating because the guardrails are old. The road is not in the best repair. And so the first few times you go down, it's not uncommon to ease down it at about 25 miles an hour.
25 miles an hour down the nearly 2-mile-long winding road, which was never really for the faint of heart. Old Freeze-Out Hill, put in place in 1919, was actually the third rendition of the road.
There's been 4 roads down Freeze-Out Hill. The first was Goodale. The second was in 1872. A gentleman by the name of Basie built a trail. And then sometime in the early 1900s, the old Freeze-Out was put in, and that was engineered by Idaho Transportation Department as part of Highway 16.
So this guy Goodale.
Yes. Timothy Goodale was a frontiersman who developed and explored what we know today as Goodale's Cutoff. It was part of the Oregon Trail that cut off a lot of the Snake River journey of the trail. It came through Boise, Eagle, across the foothills, through Emmett, and on through Orchard, and up into Brownlee.
Goodale's cutoff may have cut some time off the trip, but it didn't do much to diminish the danger.
Originally it was an Indian trail, and then in 1862, when Goodale led the wagon train across, they wound up at that point, and they would block the back wheels on the wagon, which was typical for hills, and then you would just slide the wagon down with the front wheels freewheeling so you could steer it, and that way you didn't overrun the animals.
A grade that barely made the grade.
It would have required a person with skill. By the time they got out here from the east, both the drivers and the oxen or horses, whatever they were using, would have been accustomed to things like this. I've seen pictures from the head of the trail up there, and I'm not sure I even want to walk down it, let alone drive an animal down it. It's a little bit scary for me looking down it.
That is, until one day in 1864, when a wagon train carrying goods prepared to head down the hill. Before they did, they decided to let Dr. Burge and his wife lead the way.
Doc Burge and his wife were bringing a load of glass back from Boise for their new house, and they pulled up and blocked the wheels and just started sliding down like they knew what they were doing. Unfortunately, about halfway down the hill, they slid off the trail, and to quote people from the time, the wagon tumbled into the valley.
Not a good trip for the good doctor or the glass.
The freighters took one look at that and said, no, we'll find someplace else to go down tomorrow. So they spent the night on top of the hill.
Except it was midwinter and there was no firewood to be found, which led to this description of their traveling travails the next morning in town.
They said, that is a freeze-out hill sure enough. We were froze out of the valley and nearly froze to death. Ever since, it's been known as Freeze-Out Hill.
A name that would carry over to the current road into Emmett, built by the Idaho Transportation Department in 1919. But then wagons weren't the only modes of transportation who struggled on Freeze-Out Hill.
Yeah, if you had a Model A, you had to have a full tank of gas to go up the hill. Because with a Model A and some of the other older cars, the gasoline was gravity feed. You didn't have a fuel pump. And the outlet in the gas tank was right in the middle of the tank. So going up those hills, if you had less than a half tank of gas, you would wind up going up the hill and the car would just stop running because it ran out of gas.
So as drivers tired of pushing their cars, there was a big push to straighten out the highways, making them more convenient, allowing for more traffic, which ITD did to Highway 16, and it's been that way since the 1960s. Way before that, by the way, we paid extra for those graphics. Hope you noticed them. Way back in 1928, a memorial was put at the top of the hill, but it soon became an easy target for vandals and now sits outside of the Gem County Courthouse. If you decide to make the trip to Emmett and drive down the hill, just make sure you look at the hillside from the Emmett Valley looking towards Boise. You'll notice the hill has some heavy excavation markings on it. Mike tells us the sand is actually really fine quality silicone sand in those Emmett Hills. And once it is taken out, they take it, they clean it, they ship it around the world. And it's used in glass making. They also use it sand traps on golf courses around the world. It's even been used on an overlay beaches around the world. So yeah, some of Emmett is somewhere around the world at this moment. So next time you're on vacation sitting on a tropical beach, yeah, you could actually be still putting your feet in sand from Emmett, Idaho. We wanted to end today's show with something Medina sent in after we did the St. Al's story yesterday. Every day, my husband has to break the news to people that are positive. He works at St. Al's Urgent Care. People don't believe the results. People who want to know why or how they got it, how they're going to provide for their family. He can't tell them they should have gotten the vaccine because it's not his place. But even though he doesn't have to deal with the same level ICU staff does, he knows it is still difficult. We'll see you tomorrow.